Hello, if you're looking for a royal roundup, you are in the right place. So pop the kettle on, come and join us. This is The Royal Tea on TalkTV. I'm Sarah Hewson. Coming up today, we're going to be discussing criticism of Netflix's premiere royal drama, The Crown. Is Harry and Meghan's own series on or off? Plus our panel react to Meghan's latest Archetypes podcast with Paris Hilton. And rumour of a rift in the palace that doesn't include Meghan. Surely not. We'll find out what that's all about a little bit later on. Now, joining me to talk about all of that is the Vanity Fair Royal Editor Katie Nicholl, the Royal Editor at the Evening Standard Robert Jobson, and Royal commentator and TalkTV regular Afua Hagan. Thank you all very much for being here with us this week. Thank you. Now, The Crown has been making headlines for a couple of different reasons this week, and let's start with the story that Netflix bosses have come under fire over plans to recreate Princess Diana's final hours in Paris. Robert, there's been very sharp criticism of Series 5 of The Crown so far, and it's still, 3 weeks away from coming to air. Has a line been crossed, do you think?
Well, probably. I mean, whenever we come to deal with the death of Princess Diana and the finer details, this always comes up, whether it's a documentary, whether it's The Crown, whether it doesn't really matter. It's an insensitive area, to say the least. But look, I'm not one of these people that is a Crown basher. I mean, when it first came out, dealing with things that were a long time ago, a lot of people really enjoyed it and thought it was great and gave them an insight into the way the royal family operated and what went on historically. I think as it's become closer to the present day with the characters that are very much still alive and very active in the scene, it's become more difficult for them, for the royal family. But my view is it's drama, and we can't, we don't get overexcited when we're looking at Henry V or Richard III or whatever, so I don't think we should be getting over the top.
That's the point, though, isn't it? Henry V, Richard III, we're going a long way back, and those people aren't alive to get agitated about it. But actually, these protagonists, the former Prime Minister John Major is really unhappy about the way he's been portrayed in conversations.
He is unhappy, and he's probably understandably unhappy with the line, almost saying that there was plots to get rid of the Queen, and he was part of it. I mean, it's all a bit fanciful. But I think we've got to look at this as what it is. It is a drama. I don't think that the royal family will, if they engage it too much, then they're giving it too much credibility. I think that the fact is that the Crown itself will love the publicity it's getting over this, because it just means they're going to get more viewers.
Is all publicity good publicity affair here? Because some are calling for it to be boycotted because they don't like the way it's being handled, and Netflix saying, look, it's fictional dramatisation, take it as you find it.
And Netflix and Robert are absolutely right. Netflix have never sold this as, this is a documentary about the royal family. They've made it clear from the start, and everybody should know, and everybody does know, it's a dramatisation. Some of it is based on things that happen, and of course there's lots of recreated conversations and what if this and what if that. Everybody knows that it's a drama. And
could they make it clearer, though, Afua, with a disclaimer? Because they are refusing to put a disclaimer on at the moment, aren't they? Saying, actually, and many programmes we watch would have that saying.
It wouldn't harm. I agree, but I do think as you bring it up to current date, there is a sensitivity around it. These are not characters. These are people who are alive, who are, trying to keep the royal family together and to promote it on a global stage. And I think, what harm is there to put a disclaimer in? I mean, I've watched all the series, right? And like Robert, I've covered this beat for a very, very long time. It's so realistic in so many ways because of the brilliant casting, because of the phenomenal makeup and the beautiful cinematography, that I can see why people do get sucked in. And I've done a lot of lectures in the States to, by the way, very intelligent audiences who say, wow, this is just amazing. I've had a history lesson. I was like, no. You've watched a brilliant drama, but you haven't had a history lesson.
Well, they sort of had a little bit of a history lesson.
The blurring of lines between fact and fiction.
So perhaps they should just have this is a drama that's
some
based
scenes
on
created for dramatic
and I don't think that would harm the series in any way to do it, because it has its fans. There's people who are going to watch it regardless. I don't think people are going to boycott it. I think there's nothing wrong with maybe putting a little sentence that states that some of it's drama, some of it's based on things that happen. But I also think we need to give people a bit more credit. And people know by now that it is a dramatisation. Yes, some of the characters are still alive, and there is sensitivities, like you both have said, because it's cutting quite close to the bone now. It's not things that happened hundreds of years ago. It's things that happen in our lifetime, in living memory. And especially, I think it's quite sensitive when we come to Princess Diana and what's happened there.
And
Elizabeth
Debicki playing her, and when you see the images of her there in the swimsuit, it's uncanny, isn't it?
You do a double take. And just going back to Robert's point about John Major being upset, and understandably so. I mean, look at the King. The suggestion that he tried to oust his mother at some point, which is a nonsense, by the way.
Well, no,
it's
a nonsense,
a barrel
but there
load
was,
of nonsense, according to John Major.
But there was, at the time, I think people, I mean, maybe I've been around too long, there were stories like this at the time.
There was a poll in the Sunday Times.
And there was some stories around it at the time. So all of these things are based upon, you know, what was written in the tabloids at the time, what's wrong in the stories that were knocking around at the time. But you've got to also remember that in the 90s and the 80s, that, you know, the palace were adamant about what was factually true and what is right. And actually, no, there's no affairs going on here and nothing to see here. It all came true. It was all true. So, you know, what is the truth with all these things?
But do you honestly believe that Charles went to the Prime Minister and said, we need to get rid of my mother
not
because
at all.
she's passed it?
And on the subject of affairs, I mean, the suggestion about Penny Rumsey and the late Duke of Edinburgh, I mean, that, you know, that's pretty damaging as well to the memory of the late Duke of Edinburgh. I just think you brush it off, but I think
it is. But I mean, it has been discussed pretty openly.
Oh, yeah, that was interesting this week because we had Camilla at the Booker Prize Awards meeting the actress Natasha McElhone.
Well, can I just say she has watched The Crown. I know that Camilla's watched The Crown. You know, often with a large glass of something, either a gin and tonic or a glass of wine. And I think good for her because she watches it and takes it in the spirit with which it's intended, which is with a good pinch of salt.
Well, the Duke of Edinburgh said, the Duke of Edinburgh, when the Queen was asking about it, apparently, about the late Queen, and the Duke of Edinburgh said, you won't want to watch it, it'll just irritate you, because he did watch a couple of
But Katie,
programmes.
what about the timing of this? Because you've written in your book about Charles's fears of the past overshadowing his reign. The timing of this, bringing up those stories about the turbulent, difficult 1990s.
Yes.
How concerned
probably
will
probably the toughest decade for the royal family. I mean, 1992, obviously that immortalised the annus horribilis, and you only need to say those two words, and everyone knows what you're talking about. And so I think for the king to be starting his reign, and it's got off to a really, really good start, to have everything that he's tried so hard and worked so very hard to just move on from. Because frankly, who shouldn't be able to move on from their past? We're talking quarter of a century ago. To have that dramatised in the way it is and to sort of thrust it into everyone's consciousness. And I think it is unfortunate. And I hope that, Afua, you're absolutely right. And we give the viewers the credit that they deserve, rather than sort of necessarily going with that pretty tried and tested narrative of Diana the lamb to slaughter and Charles the villain. Perhaps let's look at it a different way and look at the relationship between Charles and Camilla and perhaps flip that on its head and say, well, isn't this one of the most enduring royal love stories of all time? Because actually it is. So perhaps looking at things through a different prism would be helpful. But to go back to your point, yes, that those concerns of Charles's about the past haunting him, specifically the spectre of Diana, yes, it is something that's worried him.
I think that at the end of the day, whenever Charles was going to become king, and it is unfortunate the timing was he became king just before this was slated to come out, but I think people would always kind of remember that about him, about his past, about what happened when he was Prince Charles. And I think that will always kind of not be an issue, but I think it will always be in his background. I just think, unfortunately...
It's part of his story.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think, unfortunately, it's brought to the foreground.
A lot of these things, I mean, I did a book on the Prince, and in it corrected a lot of the stuff that was the narrative, and a lot of the narrative said things that were completely wrong, and he just wanted them corrected. He's not someone who's running away from his past, far from it. What he didn't like was certain things, such as there was claims that he snuck Princess Diana aboard the royal train, and then it was supposed to be Camilla was stuck into the palace on the eve of his wedding. All of this is complete bunkum, complete nonsense. And frankly, you know, it's as much nonsense as squeezing the toothpaste on his toothbrush. All of that stuff. I mean, I went around and corrected a lot of it. I don't think he cares too much about how the narrative. The narrative. He got divorced. He had a marriage that was difficult. Wasn't always as bad as it was, but his marriage failed. it's in the public domain. But what he just likes is the people to get things right.
Get your facts right.
And the facts are not always right.
While we're talking about Netflix, what of Harry and Meghan's documentary series? Because this week it's been on, it's been off, it's back on.
It's back on, isn't it, for December, apparently. If Page 6 is to be believed, it'll be aired in December. I mean, the plan was always that it would go after The Crown.
Yeah.
I think there's a big question mark over content, and it's a bit like Harry's autobiography. I'm sure that the chunks that are being revised are in light of the Queen's passing, not just to update it, but to make sure there's sensitivity, because I think if there isn't, there'll be a backlash, whether it's a docuseries or a book.
And Katie's book, The New Royals, is out now, and you can read lots more about the future of the royal family and the monarchy there. Let's move on now to a story about the Princess of Wales. Now, Katie, you said this week that she's been under pressure, she's been stressed of late, and that William and Kate haven't had the settling in period they might have been hoping for of their new life.
No, absolutely. They've said that themselves, haven't they? That this hasn't been the settling period and that they'd hoped for. Of course, they made that big move just after the summer holidays to move to Windsor. A significant and pretty bold move, leaving Kensington Palace, enrolling the children in new schools, setting up a new life for themselves in Windsor. I think really so that they could be below the radar and have this normal family life, which actually they're pretty successful in having. And of course, no one could have expected that the Queen would have died just at the start of all of that.
Day one of the new school.
Yes, I mean, very, very difficult times. So, yes, I think behind the scenes, a fair bit of stress and anxiety for all of the family. But they seem very much in lockstep together. They're a good support act, the Prince and Princess of Wales. And, they are doing something quite remarkable in the new royals, which is raising their children in a remarkably ordinary environment whilst stepping up to the plate, as they absolutely have done.
And certainly what we've seen so far is those issues that have always been important to them, getting extra oomph. Now they are making sure that they continue to work for those causes.
Yeah, I mean, we will do. They've got a bigger voice, haven't they? I mean, I think that when you're the heir to the throne, you're going to be, as William is now, you're going to have more oomph, as it were, when it comes on the world stage as well. They've always been the sort of the glossy magazine couple, and everyone's wanted them to be part of them. But I think when now they visit Australia or they visit, around the world, they're going to have a bit more impetus. But it's going to be interesting to see how the whole thing pans out, because of course there's more to do and less royals to do it seems.
The latest episode of Meghan's podcast Archetypes was released earlier this week with star guest Paris Hilton. Meghan spoke out about being a briefcase girl on Deal or No Deal and how she was treated like a bimbo. Afua, what did you make of this week's episode and Meghan's remarks?
I mean, such an interesting episode with Paris Hilton. I was saying to you earlier, I'm not a huge fan of Paris Hilton, but I actually am now after listening to this episode. And I think, we've all done jobs, especially at the beginning of our career, that we're not necessarily proud of, that, when you start in the bottom rungs of the ladder, especially when you're in TV, sometimes you end up doing these jobs. And I think actually what she was saying was, and in a way to relate to Paris and have this conversation, that there is times where you do a job that you don't necessarily get to use your brain. You don't necessarily get to use your degree. You don't necessarily get to contribute to a conversation. And this was that job, if you're forced to wear push-up bras and spray tans and
suck it
lashes,
in, she was
suck
told,
it,
before she went on.
Get your extensions in and all that. It was all about the looks. And she did say, we were all smart. We were all smart women. She wasn't just talking about herself. So, I think we've all done jobs that we're not necessarily proud of. And she just used that story as a way to relate to Paris and open up to her conversation and her talking about being labelled a bimbo. And actually, she's really smart, really switched on, and how she came back from that label. I'm loving all these conversations that Meghan has had.
But there have been a couple of former Deal or No Deal briefcase girls, including her co-star Claudia Jordan, firing back saying, we were there because of our personalities. We may have been models, but we were picked because we had big personalities and we could carry ourselves on TV. And Meghan being accused of being patronising. I mean, is this par for the course? Now, whatever she says is going to be criticised.
Whatever she says, someone's going to shoot her down at the moment, I think. I mean, to be honest, I wasn't overly enthralled by Paris Hilton and Meghan Markle's podcast. I'm not overly enthralled by the necessarily, I hear what you said about Paris Hilton, but doesn't do it for me. So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily tune in.
Well, I think the figures suggest otherwise. People are
Maybe
tuning
you're not the
in.
target audience,
Yeah.
Robert.
I think people are tuning in, and I think part of Harry and Meghan leaving the royal family wasn't just to become financially independent. I mean, she's talked so much about wanting to have a voice, and my goodness, has she found her voice on this podcast? I think for some people, you perhaps hear too much of her voice. I think she's doing what many of us try to do when we interview people, which is to empathise, to say I understand being in this situation. That Paris had found herself. I mean, I know Paris very well. She is not a bimbo. She's actually the sharpest, most astute, one of the funniest and wittiest people ever. And I think that, from what I've heard of that podcast, that does
It does come out because she talks about how she effectively created
She
that
did.
persona.
She created the dumb blonde persona and turned
maybe
it into
Marilyn
a
Monroe.
multi-million-dollar
Maybe
industry.
Marilyn Monroe did that, or someone before Paris Hilton. But,
Yeah, but I
Marilyn
think...
Monroe
Ain't
slightly...
broke, don't fix it.
Exactly.
But I think Robert's right. It's a case of anything Meghan says, someone's going to take offence to it, so pick and choose your podcast.
Yeah, and her point was that she didn't feel valued.
Yeah, and I think,
who she
was
is
an
and her
intelligent
brains.
woman. She used it as a stepping stone.
Got paid.
She got paid good
She
money.
says that. To be fair,
She
she
got
does
paid
admit
good
it. She
money.
says I'm
Paid, I mean, she
grateful
knew what she
for
was
it,
doing, which
but
is
she
at the
wants
job.
more for her own daughter.
Well, don't we
I'm
all?
sure
And I
that
think many
Princess
others can relate to
Lilibet
that.
will do very well.
Yes.
You said princess. We don't know that yet, though, do we?
Well, pretty much do, don't we? We don't. It's not going to be HRH, but she'll probably be Princess Lilibet with a bracket around it.
Well, I think it depends what's said in the docuseries
In the book,
and everything else,
absolutely.
right? The jury's still out on that.
Let's look ahead to next year's coronation. The Queen's Coronation Crown, made especially for the Queen Mother's 1937 coronation, features the famous but controversial Koh-i-Noor diamond. And so it might not be worn because it brings back painful memories of a colonial past. It is very controversial, isn't it? What do we think?
I think we should take it out of the crown and give it back to India and put it in a museum and stop the controversy. That's what I think we should do. I think we've got enough money in the royal family to worry about this diamond, and it keeps coming up all the time, and it's not ours. We stole it,
It's
didn't
not
we?
a battle they need to fight, really.
Not really. Dig it out.
Plenty
Wear a
of other
different crown.
tiaras or crowns.
Yeah.
Wear a
there.
different crown, but also give it back. What come on.
And that's it, isn't it? And
But give it back to who? Because that's contested. in
I'd give
itself,
it back
isn't
to the Indian government.
Yeah.
Let them all contest it in law.
Yeah, because, I mean, this diamond has changed hands from India to Afghanistan to Pakistan, way back from the 1100s to the 1300s. It's been handed down.
Give it back to where we took it from.
Yeah, which was India in
Yeah.
sort of like
And then let 'em fight it out.
1849 or something like that. And actually, I agree with you that we should just give it back, but not just that diamond. There's the Star of Africa, the second Star of Africa, all these kind of artifacts and diamonds and things that were took under duress, times of war, that was stolen effectively, should be returned to the
We
right
should just have
owners.
nice ethical diamonds grown in a lab. That's what we should do. Get a new crown and say, look, it's an ethical age. We don't want to have any stolen goods.
Yeah,
Hand it all back.
absolutely.
Talking of the Queen, there was a story in a Spanish newspaper this week alleging there is a rift between herself and the Princess of Wales, and that Catherine is becoming increasingly irritated by Camilla. I mean, Robert, what do you think? Is there any
I remember
truth
I was
in this?
giving a lecture to the Foreign Journalists Association, and the Spanish journalist asked me a question about the scandals going on in there. I said, hang on a second, mate. I said, with the greatest respect, if you just have a look at what's been
Your
going
own
on
family.
at your royal family for a second.
That's a
And
good
so
point.
I'm not, they've got the king, the last king doing what he's been doing, and all sorts of things going on with.
Sometimes it's easier to point
I
the
said,
finger
yeah,
elsewhere.
yeah.
Just
You
worry-
deal with King Juan.
You deal with Juan and all of his siblings and daughters and whatever. Then how they would know, I have no idea. I don't think there's a rift between
I don't think there's a rift.
Camilla and Kate. I think that you only saw quite recently when Kate did those photographs, lovely photographs of the Duchess as she was, now the Queen. I don't think there's any rift. And if there's any rifts, they maybe just focus on the Spanish rifts, I think.
What I hate about these kind of stories is it's always women pitted against each other. This one's having a fight with this one made this one cry. I just think, take these with a massive pinch of salt and less of pitting women against each other.
Female solidarity.
Exactly, more of that.
Well, just
please.
back to that point, because I remember that, the story about the first rift, and Robert's right, we've got enough rifts, right? We don't need to chuck another one into the equation. But, originally, when you go back to those cuttings, it was the rift between the Duchess of Cambridge and the Duchess of Sussex. Actually, it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was the rift between the brothers.
Right.
Exactly. But
So-
then you make the women the scapegoat, and when you have women involved, all of a sudden it's so much more juicy.
It's a page.
Exactly.
It's
Catfight.
Clickbait.
Yeah,
Yes,
clickbait.
it is clickbait.
Exactly.
thank you all very much indeed. That is all we've got time for this week. Many thanks to Katie, Robert and Afua. We will be back next week with all the latest on the royal family. We hope you can join us again. We'll see you then.